Things First is sponsored by Ram Trucks, built to serve.
Back here, First Things First, we're joined by former All-Pro running back Brian Westbrook. Brian, we got a lot to talk about today. Glad you're here. Need some perspective. Thursday night football, Steelers and Browns in by far the ugliest game of the season. So the Browns are up 21-7. This game is all but over. Coming to a close, Mason Rudolph and Myles Garrett get into a scuffle in the end zone. Garrett rips off Rudolph's helmet, strikes him in the head with it. Rudolph can't even believe it. Benches would clear. All-out brawl would ensue. Garrett and two others were ejected. This was an absolutely inexcusable finish in which suspensions will most certainly be handed down. For Myles Garrett, he may have played his last game of the season.
You know, what I did was foolish, and I shouldn't have allowed myself to slip like that. That's out of character.
It's inexcusable. You know, I don't care, rivalry or not, we can't do that. That's kind of the history of, you know, what's been going on here lately, hurting yourself, and that's just endangering the other team. It's inexcusable. He knows that. I hope he does now. It's just, it's tough. We'll see.
Mason Rudolph, a friend of yours, Myles Garrett, a teammate of yours. What were you saying to your teammates over there to kind of calm everybody down?
I don't think there's anything in that moment that I can really say to calm him down. You know what? The reality is he's going to get suspended. We don't know how long, and that hurts our team. And we can't do that. We can't continue to hurt this team. It's inexcusable.
Do you feel you played the final game of the season tonight?
No clue.
I got a clue. I think he played the final game of the season. Nick, how long do you think Myles Garrett should be suspended for?
I think you're right. I think it's 6 games. I think it's
because that's the remainder.
It's nice
schedule.
and clean that the rest of the schedule's 6 games, because this felt like, given the precedent of incidents similar to this, it feels like 6 games would have been just about right, whether there was 4 games left in the year or 14 games left in the year. And I know we're going to get to Baker's comments on it later in the segment, but Baker seemed to understand the gravity a lot better than Myles Garrett did after the game. I look to incidents. You see stuff like this in practice fights quite often, actually. I shouldn't say quite often, but it's not, maybe not making contact, but the swinging of a helmet you see in practice fights. As far as in a game, Antonio Smith, who I covered once, a really interesting, actually nice guy off the field, but a tough dude on the field. He swung Richie Incognito's helmet at him horizontally, not over the top, hit him across the face lightly, if you will, kind of grazed him. He got 3 games. And that was 6 years ago, 7 years ago. To me, this is the worst, Brian, incident of on-field violence, post-play, since Albert Hainsworth stomped on Andre Giroud's face. Now, I think what Hainsworth did was more heinous than this, and you might say, well, he only got 5 games. That was also a decade ago.
Yep.
The world's changed a lot in a decade in a multitude of different ways, the NFL being at the forefront of that, of legitimately caring about player safety and, to your point, legitimately caring about the optics of these things. So, listen, I don't think he's going to be banished from the league. I certainly don't think he's going to be arrested for aggravated assault, as some crazy people have speculated. But I do think the rest of the year seems about right in the context of 2019.
Well, he'll definitely be suspended for the rest of the season. 6 games, it sounds like it's easy. It may be even more. You know, this is a terrible situation. It's a terrible look for the league. It's egregious, and it's inexcusable, and it's undisciplined. And this football team has been undisciplined all season long. I'll push back a little bit on the practice stuff and the swinging of the helmet. I've been a part of training camp fights where John Runyon has ripped off the helmet, and he didn't swing it. He threw it into the stands, but he didn't swing it at another player. And there were so many times in this situation where Myles Garrett could have said, you know what, my discipline is going to kick in. I got him down on the ground, a little bit of a late hit. Now my discipline should kick in. That didn't happen. Now I'm going to rip off his helmet. My discipline should have kicked in at that point. That didn't happen. Now I'm getting pushed back by the opposing players, and I have the helmet in my hand, and I could have just dropped the helmet. My discipline didn't kick in at that point, and you end up swinging it, and you see what happened at the end of the play. At some point, the discipline from the head coach over the practice, over the camp, over the course of the season has to kick in, and it never kicked in for Myles Garrett. That just shows me that there's no discipline on the football team.
There's nothing to kick in there from the head coach.
That's a major problem. That's why the Browns lead the league in players getting ejected. That's a problem. This is a Freddie Kitchens problem just as big as it is a Myles Garrett problem.
I think, just real quick, I think your point that Myles had so many exit ramps off this is a really important one. That it didn't even have to start because it started on a late hit with 10 seconds left in the damn football game. And then there were so many times where he could have ended this, and it is a footnote to the game instead of the game being a footnote to the fight.
I think you guys are being too harsh. I look at Miles, and I'm not excusing this. I'm not saying it shouldn't be taken seriously by the league, but I think there's a couple things that we can look at. I don't think it was a cheap shot. Like Vontaze Burfict, when he got suspended, long track record. Myles Garrett does not have a lengthy track record of dirty, cheap shots. So I think he has that going for him. One, I think he was contrite after the game. He did, he wasn't defending it. He was saying, I don't know if I'm going to get suspended. So I think he is contrite. The other thing is, does anybody else, like Mason Rudolph was the one who kept perpetuating this fight, was chasing after him. It could have easily de-escalated if Mason Rudolph just backs away and just lets him go. And then you have normal quarterbacks would do that, right? You don't want to jeopardize your career. If you swing at him, you hit his helmet, you could break your hand and you don't get to play anymore. So I do think for a couple of those reasons, the NFL could look at this and say, there is a precedent before, as you mentioned with Antonio Smith, the 3 games that he had. I think 4 games, 3 to 4 games, I think would be more than adequate to send a message. But I also think what's going to be really interesting, what does Pouncey get? What does some of the other guys who were ejected as well? Because I think they're just as culpable for having this melee unfold in this game.
Just as culpable as Myles Garrett?
I do. I mean, he was being, Mason Rudolph was going after him and pursuing him when he took the helmet and made that hit. I think that has to come into play.
Real quick,
that's why I don't think it's a fight. There are no rules in fighting.
In theory, Danny, I understand what you're saying, but in practice, that's not how the world ever works.
Right.
If I keep, you're bigger than me. People think I'm a tiny guy. I'm not, but you're a big guy. If I after the show, I'm like, and I keep talking trash to you, and I get in your face, and I just keep, like almost daring you to hit me.
Like you do on Twitter.
Yeah, exactly right. And you overhand right me.
Right.
Even if I was the instigator, even if I could have walked
You're in the
away.
wrong no matter what.
And by the way, if after you overhand right me, Brian Westbrook and Dusty come over and attack you because you've knocked me down, they are, even if in a vacuum, well, he threw a punch, that's going to be looked at so differently because the one moment here that is seemingly bigger than all the others combined would have been yours, even if that's not really fair. But you know what's also not totally fair is that if David DeCastro tried to block the helmet, Myles Garrett's intent would have been no different. If he blocked it, this is not a big deal. Maybe he's suspended 1 game. Conversely, if the helmet hits him differently, if a guy who has already suffered a terrible concussion this year, if he gets knocked out by this
is also
then we are talking about maybe a full 16-game file for reinstatement type of suspension. If the helmet, one of the rivets, cuts across his face and he's bleeding, like what actually helped Myles Garrett to me here, Brian, is that Mason's response was, what the hell did you just do? Threw his arms up and not falling down, not being seriously injured by it.
By the way, Mason Rudolph was the one who went for his helmet first.
But he wasn't successful at it.
Right, but that doesn't make it any better.
Yeah, Garrett should have stopped at some point. I think Pouncey ends up getting suspended for all of the punches that he just threw for a couple games. You just wonder what goes through a player's mind. At some point, you say, well, you have to stop. The other part is that where's his guys at? Where are the other guys that say, you know what, let's go get the one guy that can help us save our season? Because throughout that football game, Myles Garrett was the reason that Mason Rudolph had trouble. He couldn't move around in the pocket, couldn't do a lot of things because Myles Garrett was harassing the entire football game. Where's his guys that are saying, let's save our star defensive player, let's help him? They couldn't get there quick enough. It's certainly disappointing to see this happen in the game, but at some point, drop the helmet, allow the play to go on. It's the end of the football game. He didn't see it.
Nick, what do you think about what Baker Mayfield had to say on the field just moments after this happened, to have the discipline and the wherewithal to be able to say, hey, let me put this in perspective. This was inexcusable.
I think this is the way this plays out, I'm very curious because I think this is going to show the dichotomy, the split between the media that cover the game and the people that actually play it. This is going to be, of all Baker's comments this season, the one I think most applauded by the media and the one met with the most skepticism in his locker room. I think that when Baker came out and said, man, the refs, I'm going to get fined, I don't care, free speech, all that nonsense, every show like this one was like, Baker, grow up. And my guess is in the locker room, especially amongst young players, they probably were like, damn, I'm glad he said something, stick up for us. He's going to be applauded for, in the heat of the moment right after, saying it's inexcusable, it can't happen, by folks like us. And I think in the locker room, guys, tell me if you think I'm wrong, I think guys are going to say, man, you didn't have to say that. Like, I didn't see it. I don't know. I hate that it happened. Got to watch the tape. You know, Miles, my teammate, Mason's my friend. Like, I don't think this will play great amongst his teammates.
I think you're wrong. I think that it will play great with the media. I think a lot of people will say Baker is taking responsibility. He's saying the right things. But I think in the locker room, the guys understand that as well. We have a chance to make a playoff run. We have a chance to make a playoff push, and this probably ends that push. And so they're upset about the undisciplined plays over the course of the entire season, not just here. And Baker showed that his uncomfortableness, his leadership in that moment. But he also is saying this is not something new. This is something that has happened all season long. And I think not only Baker, but the guys in the locker room are certainly disappointed about that as well.
I think this is a very mature moment for Baker Mayfield, something he hasn't displayed of a lot of maturity in his young career. I think this was a very mature statement. And I do think, like, we can disagree on the length of the suspension, but no one is disagreeing of the seriousness and the gravity of the moment. And I think even in that locker room, those guys were astounded at what unfolded at the end of that game.
I just wonder that if this ends up being longer than any of us expect, if he gets 8 games, if it goes into next season.
I think it's going into next season.
And Jenna does think that, and
yes.
Listen, people have speculated that. Then do people in the locker room who maybe are angry at Myles Garrett now, but if they think he's overpunished, then all of a sudden do they start to wonder, did Baker add to it by right after the game as the leader of the football team seemingly being as horrified as everyone else? Did he unintentionally add fuel to the fire? I don't think that'll be fair, by the way, if people feel that way. But guys in a locker room are not always the most rational human beings, and you get a little territorial. It's us against the world. I just wonder how it plays.
How quickly do you think this comes down? Today?
Oh, I think I don't know about today, but before Sunday kickoff.
Yes.
We'll have.
Absolutely.
All right. I just want to know when I can tell you guys I was right. I don't know if it's tomorrow, if it's probably not going to be. Coming out, will Lamar Jackson outduel Deshaun Watson on Sunday?